Hi everyone, this is Isaac from Bible Bits, and today we'll be having a look at this concept of calling that's often thrown around in Christian circles, particularly in the context of work and direction for life. Let's start with this little test. Have you ever heard Christians around you say something along the lines of, "This job is my calling," or "God has called me to be XYZ"? I definitely have, and it appears that this kind of phrasing has become quite popular among Christians these days. Maybe you've even said something similar yourself when someone's asked you about why you've chosen the degree or job path that you've taken. But what do people really mean when they bring up this term calling, particularly in the context of work and direction for life? Well, this article from Christianity Today seems to sum up what I think many modern evangelicals define calling as. The author, Angie Ward, appears to think that a quote-unquote calling can be defined as a God-given conviction about your life's direction. She fleshes this idea out by describing calling as involving things like inner assurance, a deep persuasion, or an urge toward a particular way of life or career. In a sense, what Angie is describing is a sense of affinity, that God will place in somebody a deep affinity for a particular job or direction, and that by adopting this job or direction, you are fulfilling a special role designed just for you specifically. Now, it all sounds great, but I've got some problems with this view. If you are one of those people who has heard others use this terminology before, have you ever paid close attention to what they say that they're being called to? Maybe they're called to be a lawyer or a doctor, maybe an accountant or an engineer. But have you ever heard someone say that they were called to be a garbage cleaner or a McDonald's employee? Chances are you haven't. You see, when people say that they're being called to a particular job, it always seems to be a job that is high paying or well regarded by the community. But rarely do people ever say that they are called to blue-collar work or other forms of less socially desirable work. So does this mean that all those poverty-stricken Christians in third world countries who are forced to work menial jobs day in and day out are somehow less Christian than the rest of us because they're not living up to that special calling that they have in their lives? Surely not. And so this really seems to expose this idea of vocational calling as not really being from God at all, but rather coming from our own selfish desires. It's a way of expressing what we want for life, wrapped up in this nice Christian packaging. You see, when we turn to the Bible and look at what it has to say about this term calling, it's never really used in the context of a special vocation. Rather, as William Taylor helpfully points out in his book Revolutionary Work, the word calling is mostly used in reference to becoming a Christian, sometimes used in reference to living in holiness, and only once in reference to one's station in life. That one reference is found in 1 Corinthians chapter 7 verse 20. And when read properly, it talks about calling in the context of conversion and how to live in light of salvation. Paul's overriding emphasis to his contextual audience in the verses surrounding verse 20 is that whether you are circumcised or not, a bondservant or not, married or not, remain in God. For example, if you are a slave and could gain your freedom, sure, take that opportunity. But you don't have to be overly concerned if you don't get that opportunity, because whatever station you are in at the moment, the primary concern is serving Christ. And so ironically, this passage is really speaking to the idea that we shouldn't worry too much about the specific jobs or offices we take in life, because ultimately, what's important is that we're remaining in God in accordance with our salvation calling, whatever position in life we find ourselves in. We're given the freedom to change our position so long as it's not sinful, but we shouldn't keep chopping and changing our current circumstances to find that perfect fit job we think is out there for us, because that's simply not our priority. To sum things up, firstly, there's no such thing as a vocational calling. This idea that everyone has been called to a special office in life that God has designed just for them usually comes from one's personal desires for the future, justified by the wrapping of Christian language. And secondly, rather than worrying about whether the job we're in right now is the perfect job that God has called you to, the real calling we should worry about is the salvation calling all Christians have received, and the call for us to remain in God by living a holy life, no matter what circumstances we find ourselves in at the moment. And this should change our mindsets completely, moving us away from stressing too much about our current stations in life. Whether you're a garbage cleaner or a CEO, single or married, the truth is, the most important thing for you is to remain in God and to live a holy life that aligns with your salvation calling. Of course, in the future, God might give you those opportunities to change your station in life, and so long as you're not in sin, feel free to make that change. But the important thing is to not stress or worry too much about whether you're living up to this fictitious calling that God has given to you. If you are interested in reading a bit more about this topic, I would highly recommend picking up a copy of the book I mentioned earlier, Revolutionary Work by William Taylor. A lot of the points that I brought up today were actually inspired by this book, and the reality is that this short video is only enough to cover the tip of the iceberg when it comes to some more complex concepts like how Christians are to view work as a whole. Well, that's all we've got time for today, unfortunately. But as usual, if you've got any comments, questions, or feedback, feel free to get in touch. Until next time, take care, have a lovely week, and I hope to see you soon.